So let's talk a little bit about what respect is. This is we just facilitated a day-and-a-half workshop. You're getting the very short version. I told Mike we had to be wrapped up by noon today, right? No, we just did a day-and-a-half workshop on this last week, so I'm going to give you a very quick overview. Before I tell you what respect is, let me tell you what it is not. Okay? I'll put a statement up here, and I want you to think about it, and I want to see by show of hands how many agree and how many disagree. Respect does not equal tolerance. Do you agree or disagree? Those of you who agree with that, raise your hands, please. Raise them up high so we can actually see them. Those of you who disagree, raise your hands. Okay? So some of you are like really hedging your bet. You're like, I'm not raising my hand. It's too early in the school year. Well, let me ask you this. Let's say that after this first week of school, you go back and you're talking with your significant other, and they're saying, so, how was the first week? And you say, you know what? Gosh, the energy was... I have never felt so tolerated in my entire life. How many of you think that would be a ringing endorsement for the work environment over here? I really felt tolerated. Do you think we could do better than that? That's why we say respect is different than tolerance. If you look at this, there's a continuum that we've created. Tolerance falls right smack in the middle of this continuum. And the reason is because tolerance is passive. You don't have to do anything to prove to other people that you're, quote, tolerant, with the exception of putting a big, thick zipper over your lips when you feel like saying smug to or about somebody at some point in time, right? There's really no activity involved with tolerance, per se. Now, as you move away from that center point, a couple things happen. You have to start spending more and more energy, either going up the continuum or down the continuum. Now, if my first assessment of somebody is that I'm not sure that I trust or like that person, what we end up doing is we spend energy to avoid them. Does it take physical energy to avoid people? Does it take cunning and intelligence some days? You pull into the parking lot the same time they do, right? Only 4 cars away, so what do? You slide down into your seat, make that phone call, check your text messages, maybe listen to that NPR story, whatever. So you have to think about how to avoid people sometimes. If you're in a staff meeting with someone that you don't particularly get along with, you strategically position yourself as far away at the other opposite end of the table so that you can see them, but maybe they can't see you, at least not directly, right? Now, if we really dislike somebody, and we have developed some very negative emotions, not just suspicion or apprehension, but dislike, we spend even more energy. And what happens is our behavior becomes hostile. And hostility is probably the death knell for any organization in terms of its productivity. I'm going to define hostility very broadly. Hostility is any action that we engage in that intentionally harms another person in any way, either physically, emotionally, psychologically, even reputationally. Anytime we spend energy doing that, that is hostility, plain and simple. Now, it may look a little bit different with adults than it does with kids on the playground, but hostility is hostility. How productive could an organization be if too much of the energy of the individual contributors was spent on being hostile with each other or avoiding each other? It doesn't sound like it would be setting the stage for a very productive organization. So what would be the opposite of avoiding people? Let's go up to the other side. What would be the opposite in your minds of avoidance? Give me a word. Anybody, a word, a phrase. Welcoming, okay. What else? The accepting, okay. Even before that, the difference between avoidance is engaging people, right? Simply, rather than shying away from them, we're going to kind of throw ourselves in there. You see, the human brain is really fascinating. It operates extremely quickly. When we see somebody, at first, within 7 1,000ths of a second, we immediately size them up. Gender, physical stature, ethnicity, if there are any visible clues, and we put people into all these boxes based on what we know about people like that. So the brain sizes up all these differences, and if I engage people, what that means is not only do I take note of those, but I lean into them to further explore them. And the more we do that, what that ends up doing is taking us to this magical place called respect. Respect cannot be demonstrated until we make the time to engage one another and learn what makes us different beyond what we see on the surface. So the critical ingredient is engaging people. Now, let me ask you this. As a species, do you think that we are more prone to avoid people different than us or to engage them? We're more prone to avoid them, very simply because genetically that's pre-programmed into us from our survival instincts. Now, what group of people do we know that each of us has had the opportunity to interact with that is not naturally suspicious and avoid people? What group of people do we know who do this? Children. Children go through a phase where everything needs to be explored. Every person needs to be explored. For the most part, there are exceptions. There are some kids who have stranger anxiety. But even the most adventurous kids, at some point, their survival wiring kicks in, and we learn. And it happens with every species, too, not just human beings. Our survival wiring kicks in, and we learn to be apprehensive. So what I'm going to suggest we do is go back and try to rewire ourselves, reconnect those synaptic pathways that caused us to engage, not avoid differences. And there's a very easy way to do this. There's one mental mindset that makes this easy. Rather than seeing differences and being suspicious about those differences, what would be the opposite of suspicion? Curiosity. Curiosity. When you see people, anybody, be curious about those differences. Take those differences that you see, lean into them, and discover even what's beyond what you can see on the surface. Here's our definition. If you had to come up with a definition for respect, here's what it would be. It's an active process of engaging people from all backgrounds. You see, a lot of us engage some people pretty easily. What kind of people do we engage pretty easily? People like us. People that we think are like us. But I'm going to do this with people from all backgrounds with the intent to increase my awareness and effectiveness. That's the payback that I get. When I make the investment in other people and I take a little bit more time to get to know what makes them unique, my awareness goes up. And when my awareness goes up, so does my effectiveness at collaborating with them. And here's the litmus test. We're going to do this in a way that esteems both myself and those with whom I interact. Quite simply, when I walk away from each engagement with somebody, I want to ask myself, do I feel proud about how I handle that? And did they feel better about themselves as a person because of our interaction? Now, that's a very high standard to hold for ourselves, especially in a very busy world. But I would suggest to you that's what's going to make your students 5 years from now, 10 years from now say, wow, that teacher really made me feel special, because we're creating a legacy every time we engage somebody else.